Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Financial Express, for having us here. It's a privilege for me to have a fireside chat panel discussion with two of my professional colleagues, Soumick and Mayank. Mayank is just parking his car and gonna be here very shortly. Maybe we thought we'd at least get started. It was so interesting to hear the Honorable Minister uh, and the perspectives and the thought of clarity that he had with respect to regulations and importance of abiding them. And I was just giving the thought to the whole title, Digital India Safety Summit, Digi Fraud and Safety Summit, right? And usually in our experience, we have seen a lot of focus on safety, security tends to happen during the course of data lifecycle, which to me means once you have the data inside your enterprise, how do you want to put the right controls to make it safe and secure? But probably there is a bit of a less tendency to give a serious thought about the similar aspect and caution when we are collecting the data. And if we are able to do the things rightfully, the time we are doing the data collection itself may be significant effort with respect to the frauds and safety can be well achieved. With that thought, we thought of having this discussion over like 20 minutes or so with two eminent guests that we have. And before I start taking their perspective, I'll share an example or a use case why I thought this topic was so important. As a part of my discussions with one of the enterprises, we were trying to understand the data lifecycle and various questions that were being asked. One of the questions that I asked them was that, what do you do inside, what all data do you collect, let's say for a customer? And very understandably, the enterprise gave me list of questions or the data points that they were collecting for the customer. It had data fields which asked for gender, religion, date of birth, age, and so on, name, address, expectedly. But then when I asked them, what is the reason for us to secure the information with respect to gender? What is the reason for us to understand the age when date of birth has been taken and vice versa? And most importantly, what is the reason for us to understand the religion? And the room was almost silent the way we are because even I was doubtful as to why that was being done. And the only answer I got in that discussion was the fact that Manish aise hota aa raha hai. This is how it has been happening for decades. We have just been getting and asking people for sending the data because there's a perception, more the data I have, the better it is going to be used someday. So what is that day? We don't know that yet. And more importantly, when I started to double click, the product and the services that that enterprise was offering had nothing to do with gender. It had nothing to do with the religion. But still those data points were being collated. That made me realize that if we start questioning ourselves at the very beginning, what data I am collecting, why I am collecting, a lot of our hurdle during the course of keeping it safe and secure may be taken care of. And I always believe in the principle, the limited canvas I have, better I can control. Broader the canvas, more control are required, more resources are required, more money, resources, time is required. With that perspective, we have Mayank joining us. Mayank, thank you so much for joining. I was just sharing the context that we three spoke about the importance of this topic. And then of course the answer didn't stop there, right? So even if the people in the room realize that we are collecting extra data, but what to do with it and what not to do without it. So I'll leave that as a point for me to start. And maybe Soumick, I'll start with you first. The example that I gave puts a question mark about the data we like, but make this slides for you, Soumick. I'd be more than happy to hear yours. The data connection techniques, which were, for example, let's say pre-erupt of a listening that is pre-DPDP versus post. At least with respect to business data, our enterprise data, revisiting the data and letting the data out, they're still okay. Let the data come and figure out later what to do. Your thoughts on it?
First of all, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Soumick Bhattacharya. I represent the Mayank Pharma as a Chief Information Security Officer and Data Privacy Officer as well. Thank you, Manish, for asking the questions. In my understanding says that in the earlier days, before this DPDP hack has been released and also in action, I think collection of the data was most of like a different posture altogether. They're asking the data like anyway, exactly how you mentioned the gender, race, and then which particular caste I belongs from, my name, my Aadhaar card number or PAN card number, so on and so forth. But after this DPDP Act has been comes from the Indian, now this is not a bill, this is an act which has been transferred into. So we have, I think, enterprise along with the users level as well. We are very cognizant about the requirement of the data, and we are very, very specific that which particular data that you are asking for, how much data that we can provide as well. Because at the end of the day, security and privacy is everyone's responsibility. It is not just about the data processor who is collecting the data, even the data principal who is giving the data to the opponent party. We are also similarly responsible for that, why we are giving this data. Like, for example, if I'm providing my Aadhaar card's Xerox copy to someone to process some data for me, what is the purpose of their Aadhaar card? Am I providing this Aadhaar card for entering into an hotel? Or am I providing the Aadhaar card for processing my SIM card? Or am I giving this my PAN card for processing any financial credit card information and so on and so forth, right? So the purpose of collecting the data has to be very, very significant with a very purpose-driven, right? Why I'm providing this data, why this data need to be processed, this is the responsibility for the data principal as well as the data fiduciary and the data processor both the way. I think this is very important part that we have to be very cognizant with. And enterprise also started understanding that the more the data that we collect, it is not just about the data that we are going to collect. Even the data also need to be retained, and then after how many times that data also need to be shredded out, right? So, as the purpose of the audit, what kind of data that I have to kept in my repository so that I need to provide the same data to the auditor to get the revalidation purpose, right? So this is the way industry had already started thinking. We had already started thinking that even from the HR perspective also, when we are collecting data from the candidates, which kind of data that we can collect, how much the data that we can collect, what are the different kind of data that we can process also, has to be very, very significant. Industry has already started visiting those parts.
Thanks, Soumick. So you concur with me that situation has changed. We should not just freely ask for the data that we were saying earlier.
Yeah.
But Soumick, in your experience, if I just want to do a double click, how easy or difficult it is for management team to accept this change? Because earlier there was no restriction, right? Ask the data as much you want, but now things are changing. So how are you or enterprises at large are adapting for this change? Any thoughts on that?
See, adaptation, proposition, and improvisation, right? These three words. So ultimately, if we did not adapt, we will not be able to improvise. So that is always the theory and the framework we driven for. So this is always a challenge because nobody likes the changes at any given point of time. But changes is required to be purpose-driven, changes is required to be disciplined, and changes is required to improvise. So if this is something for a good reason that we are doing, all the data that we are collecting, the data that we are processing, the data that we are retaining, right? All those things, if it is a purpose-driven, what are the purpose which is behind to achieve that particular goal has to be very, very, like the incognizant with the requirement itself. So when we understand that, okay, this is the purpose that we are retaining the data or processing the data, so I think enterprise also start understanding, Manish, because ultimately, the more the data that we preserve, the more the risk that we have, right? So at the end of the day, if there are something challenge will happen, it is not just about 250 crore of the fine that we have. Even what I have heard from one of the Supreme Court, the general advocate, that even the board of the director can go behind the bar as well. So if that is the cases, and then we have, this is an eye opener for us. So we'll be more disciplined in that such way. It will take some time. Definitely, changes cannot be done overnight. So it will comes up. It will improvisation plan will come. The thought process will come. Will come up at different checkpoints, and then slowly and steadily we need to move on with the requirement itself, and that will make us more disciplined. Enterprise that understand that part, and with the proposition and an adaptation, it will go on with a perfect purpose, and then I think it will be driven as per the requirement will comes up.
Great. So my takeaway, Soumick, is that realization is the first.
Absolutely.
So you start realizing, and that's where the journey starts. And the fact that this is no more an option, it's an act or an act.
Absolutely.
Right? So we have to operate it. And the point that it will not happen overnight. It's going to be a journey.
Absolutely.
The journey starts now.
Yep. It's absolutely a step-by-step process. And It is, nothing can be changed over the night, right? It takes time. People require some time to adapt. Then with that adaptation, they make their behavioral changes done. Even after the behavioral change has been done, then the improvisation will comes from. It is always a step-by-step process, right? So that's the reason even government doesn't ask us that you have to do it by overnight. You will have a sufficient amount of time. Take your time, get adapted with the system, make yourself purpose-driven, get yourself disciplined, and move on with the requirement. Be specific.
Great, thanks. And on the point that you mentioned that the more data we have, the more problem we have to retain, something that I mentioned.
Right.
What are the canvas of problem? And in my experience, Soumick, I have never seen any business process owner saying, I want to get rid of my data. Whenever we would approach them, the answer would be, what if we need this data tomorrow for very practical reasons? That's how we have always been. But I think that point of change has to start now, not only in the psyche and acceptance, but also putting the right processes in place which limit the data collection and the usage for a purposeful.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Mayank, hope you have got your breath settled now. And, I'll just ask a question. The point of data collection or the whole philosophy of collecting the data is not only limited to personal information, right? The DPDP makes us talk about privacy, but at large, the companies and enterprises may still talk about collecting more data. And since our school days, we have been hearing this philosophy of garbage in, garbage out, right? The quality of data that you get in gets really the output that you have. At the point of data collection itself, how is your experience controlling the quality that helps enterprises, not only with the regulatory changes, but also the business efficiencies and the expected outcome may have? Any perspectives on that?
Yeah. So good morning, everybody. Thanks, Manish, for that question. So seeing this thing of collection of data, at least in two different industries, in the financial services and now in the healthcare side. On the financial services side, I think there was much more structured data being collected. Some of it being used during the time of transaction, and some of it was there as demographics which you could use potentially to design the right kind of products at a later point of time. But there was always this hope that you would really put this data to use at some point of time for some marketing campaigns and doing a cross-sell, upsell, and positioning the right kind of products for those customers. Most of the companies were not really able to tap onto this data in this manner. The primary reason being that whatever was collected was not really good enough to be leveraged. So clearly a garbage in and garbage out. When people realize that the information that is being captured at that point of time is not being scrutinized, is not being used, and is not really going to stop the transaction from getting processed, they would just put in junk. Because everybody is looking at how do they save those few seconds? How do they tell the customer that, sir, that you only that need to sign this particular part, rest I'll fill. And consequently, I'm sure all of us as customers might have experienced this. Most of the information that goes in, which is not really required for that transaction, is actually quite useless. As a result, when the companies actually want to leverage that information for marketing purposes or for designing the right kind of products or for any meaningful purpose, the biggest problem that is faced is not the unavailability of the data. Data is there, but it's all garbage. So then the step comes in, how do we, curate this data? How do we clean up this data? And then, doing it for the massive amount of data which is there in the enterprises is a substantial, effort, investment of time and a cost. So people would pick up, okay, these are the 5 fields that we would go and clean up. It could be as simple as a PIN code, so that you kind of really identify where does this person actually live and what is the kind of demographic segment that the person might belong to, and so on and so forth, right? So the effort of identifying that there is a problem with the data collected actually comes in much later. And then there is an effort that goes in for cleaning up that data and improving upon it. Over a period of time, some of these things have been understood. It's not that people are following exactly the same processes, but the realization once it came in, then with those learnings, improvements were made. Collect fewer amounts of data, fewer fields, but let those be accurate. That also eases the burden for the customer or the distributor or whoever is the intermediary to capture that information, makes the transaction that much seamless or less friction involved there. And what you get as an enterprise is something that is meaningful, that is useful. How do you use it subsequently is a different matter altogether, right? But at least what you will have is going to be much more reliable as compared to what you've got. So this, I think, realization probably has been there for the last few years. With DPDP coming in, I think this is going to become even more stark. Because as Soumick very rightly mentioned, the more information that the enterprises have, not just in quantum of the data, in terms of the number of customers or the period or how much duration you've retained the data, but also the kind of data that you are retaining at your end. So if the data is useful and it's very, very critical for you to run the business and know about your customer, then of course go for it. But if it is just there for the hope that someday we will do something with it, better not to collect it. Because, you're going to put yourself at a higher amount of risk. There is going to be higher level of friction in that entire transaction. And for all the practical purposes, what you might be collecting is not going to be useful. So that's, what has been kind of a spectrum shift. It varies from industries to industry. Somewhere, in the zealousness of the team who creates the acquisition forms, we would ask just about everything. And then the person who's trying to get that fill, so only these 3 things are important, rest you can leave. So, I think that is probably going to go and see a much, tighter shift, and perhaps a streamlining of those processes as well. But I think it is still a journey from a realization to getting those learnings implemented will take some time.
Thanks. I think, Mayank, I think it's a practical nirvana situation when business says these are the only 3 things I require, right? But we're going to be there for soon. What really caught my attention, Mayank, is the point that you mentioned that when we realize that the data is garbage, it's too late in the journey. And what I believe happens, Mayank, is that we end up collecting more data, which is against the whole philosophy of limiting the collection itself. So we want to collect limited data. We want it to be in a controlled shape. But if you have not the right quality data, it ends up getting you more because you don't know what to do with it. And of course, it adds to the perspective of retention and the deletion all through. And just for the audience, I'm sure you would have heard 2 examples that our panelists talked about was limiting the usage, limiting the collection of data, and finding the only relevant fields. This actually is a practical way of what we call principle of data minimization, right? Minimize what we are collecting so that the journey is much more convenient. I'll go back to you, Mayank, on the point that so your perspective was on the larger enterprise data. It was not really personal versus non-personal. With DPDP coming in, consent becomes a very strong base for personal data collected, whereas there is a legitimate use, which is a non-consent based also. Any thoughts, how should enterprises consider when the data collection is happening on consent or a non-consent basis? Because we were not habitual to these mandates in the pre-11th of August era. Any perspectives on that?
I think, the consent part for the organizations, I think any time that they're collecting any kind of personal information, the consent necessarily has to be taken, which would actually force enterprises to reconsider, do they really need this information? If they do, then they are actually making it explicit that this is the data that is being collected, and taking that consent. For what purpose, etc., kind of whatever the act says needs to be followed. But for sure, it will make the organizations reconsider what is the information that they need to collect, what is the data that is required to be, taken. Because nobody would want to be caught on the wrong side of the act. It's a very, very important, very strategic act, for the nation as a whole. So I think that's how we expect that, things would really pan out. Making people aware that this is the information that is being collected, for what reason, for what purpose. And at the back end, organizations doing an introspection. What do I need this information for? Can I do without it? Because if I don't, then I have a much larger and onerous responsibility of managing that data in a safe manner.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, again, the point that you mentioned is classic. Whether I have other information or data points that I can live without asking for more is a very, very strong way for us to start accepting this change, which is going to take a while. I always realize time runs fast, but this clock is really running fast, right? So I'm going to make it quick. Soumick, coming to you. You as a CISO and a DPO have a classic combination of privacy, security, on data, privacy, personal data and the non-personal data. And with this whole zero trust architecture coming in. What is your philosophy of adaptation of these three in interest of keeping the data private and safe and meaningful for businesses to reuse? Any experiences you want to share on that?
Yeah, surely. Thank you for asking the question, Manish. So basically, security without a privacy, security without a protection is nothing, right? So if we talk about the security and data could be at everywhere, right? So if my application is running and talking with my database, there is also data. If my network is running with the infrastructure, there is also data is running. If I talk about the zero trust security model, zero trust is not just about the technology. Anything and everything which considered as an implicit trust, that should be absolutely denied on people, process, and technology, all three aspects. When we talk about the technology, then definitely starting with a layer 0 to layer 7, irrespective any of the layer, we should have to be provide the security. And when the security need to provide, the privacy is a must. That is the reason how much the application need to talk to the database, how much the application talk to infrastructure, which infrastructure need to talk to which particular other infrastructure. There should be a significant discipline is required. That is the reason we also, if I should not want to go more deep dive with the technological hardcore information because I want to make it more general. So the point here is that the technology driven any of the architecture should be very, very insignificantly disciplined, and then we have to be very, very incognizant with the requirement that why we are creating this connectivity, right? That is one of the part. Second, if we talk about the process, we talk about the audit, we talk about the governance, risk and compliance, we talk about the data privacy. So these are all the process driven stuff should also be incognizant with the requirement of that process, why I am implementing that, and then where I am implementing that, how much time it will be retained for, right? So everywhere, wherever the data lies, even on the process sides also, if I am creating a control matrix, I'm talking about the different framework, if I talk about the different standard matrices, everywhere the process is driven over there. And that process, if I talk about any incident response, if I talk about any incident management tools and all, where we are keeping a lot of information about the configuration item, we talk about the configuration database, we talk about the CMDB, how much data that I'm retaining over there, which data is required for where, and how it is going to be processed for everywhere, we have to have a proper discipline, right? That is why we can achieve only the success is all about the privacy, right? And then privacy for the turn into the protection. And when the privacy turn into the protection and we are having a rock solid protection, then only we can talk about we are having a robust security, right? So it's a very chain-wise reaction is very much there. So that is the reason even if I talk about after the technology, there is a process, and next part is the, like the people. So whenever we talk about the people, then definitely this DPDP Act, all this human processing data, your age, your PAN card number, your Aadhaar card number, your maybe the gender, race, and everything. How much I'm collecting the data, how much I can collect the data, how much I can prevent the excess data collection, and then how much I'm retaining that data. Am I really in a position to process those data which I'm not going to collect? So all these things need to be very, very regulated. We have to be disciplined, and we have to be incognizant with the requirement that why I need those data and how I'm processing this data. So I think if I can make these things very, very strict and ahead with the requirement and be specific, then zero trust security model will automatically comes up.
It's just time's up, and it's exactly the time where Soumick concluded. This is great, and I think security, privacy go hand in hand to achieve the objective required. And hearing both of you, I believe your companies are in safe hands because of the philosophy that you bring in. Two things I want to leave on the stage before we conclude. First, the fact that businesses have a perception that there is no end of data lifecycle is a very, very important point for us to start realizing. We always talk about collection of data. We've heard our panelists talking about retention of data, which means after a particular point in time during the life cycle of data, the data has to go away. This is not easily accepted. We fear if we let the data go away, what happens, right? So shall we talk about data protection? One of the philosophies of data protection is that we have to let data go away, which means we have to let the data outside our enterprise, make it unusable for us, so that the purpose, what Mayank had mentioned about, is limited for the time duration that we have. This acceptance that let the data go away is not easy to have, and probably it's another journey point that we have to talk about. Lastly, what we heard was largely about enterprises, but enterprises are not alone. There's a strong third-party ecosystem that we have. If enterprises are putting the right set of controls with respect to collection within their own enterprise, and if there are data collection authorities or third parties that we have, if they are not serious about what we are doing, if they are not having the same discipline, same philosophy, same change of this journey, then the purpose is half done. We have to ensure that all our data collection agencies which are working on our behalf or they are working with us, they equally use the data only for limited purposes. Otherwise, the intent that we as an enterprise have may get lost. And in today's world, I don't think enterprises can work without third parties, so we have to have them. But that discipline has to happen both in-house as well as with third parties. That's pretty much from my side. Any last concluding remarks from you on Mayank or Soumick?
I think I just can take a privilege to talk about just one single line. Privacy, protection, and security is everyone's responsibility, right? I would not wait for the data processor to tell me that, please give me this data, I need to process these things. Then my next question would be why you need this data, right? There are a lot of e-commerce website. There are a lot of if you go to any of the shopping mall, right? They simply ask, sir, please provide your phone number. My second question is, why you need my phone number to give the bill? They said that your reward will go there. I said, I don't require the rewards. If you need to provide me the bill, give me the hard copy, right? Phone number is a very, very private to us. Why unnecessarily different e-commerce site? Why unnecessarily the different, this kind of shopping mall and all, they're asking a lot of private information to us, right? Provide your phone number. The person who is behind me, right? Think about it. There is a lady who is giving his phone number. There a person behind her is just standing on and he's also listening, right? So dumpster driving is also one of the posture which is part of the ethical hacking, right? So why should I give someone the chance to be myself very less informative, that why I'm giving this data to process this data on my behalf, right? Somebody is listening behind me. So that is the reason I just want to conclude myself that security is everyone's responsibility. We have to take a privilege that somebody who is processing my data, I have to ask them the questions. Ask them the right question at the right front. By doing that, you are basically safeguarding yourself, and that is our responsibility in our hand. That's it.
Thank you, Soumick. Mayank, anything?
Yeah, I think just the last 10 seconds on this. The point that you mentioned about the third-party risk, that is usually the one which the enterprises not focus as much. So I think that is definitely an area that will need more attention, and clearly the Act puts across the onus back on the enterprises to ensure that whoever that they're working with as a part of that ecosystem is also following or, is compliant. And I think what Soumick mentioned is the same point, that finally, while enterprises, government, will do every bit, we as citizens or we as the consumers need to be cognizant where to part with what information and what are the questions should we ask, before sharing any of this personal information, because there's only so much part that can get done with rules. Rules take care of everybody, and that's why some of the times they're not perfect. But unless we ourselves are, not really taking adequate care of our personal information, frankly, there's not much that anybody would be able to do, and we'll remain vulnerable.
Thank you so much, Soumick. Thank you, Mayank. Thank you, Financial Express, for having us here. And thank you all for listening to us. Hopefully, it was value to your time. Thank you.